Hi, everybody, and welcome to our meeting this Thursday. We're excited to have you all here, and we thank you for joining us. I just want to say a quick reminder, we will be answering questions throughout the call, so make sure that you are asking them in your questions section. So now we're going to actually go ahead and do some polling questions. So in just a second here, you're going to see a question come up on your screen. Have you hosted a face-to-face meeting or event since March of 2020? So if you guys would all go ahead and answer that, we'd love to hear your feedback and what you guys are doing. All right, let's go ahead and look at our results. So it does look like we have a lot of people who aren't quite there hosting meetings yet, but that's great. We're happy to have you here, and we hope we can give you some helpful resources to kind of get back to meeting face-to-face. But we are really happy to see that we have 15% of people who are hosting meetings, so that's great. Congratulations to you guys. We love to see that. And we just have one more poll question that we're going to go ahead and do here. So when is your next face-to-face meeting planned for, if you are planning meetings right now? So is it from the August to September timeframe, October to December, January through March, or 2021 and beyond? All right, and let's look at our results. So we have a pretty good mix here. We have 22% that are planning some meetings for August to September, so that's really great, super encouraging to hear that. And then it looks like we have a decent amount of people October, December, January through March, and then a lot in April and 2021 and beyond. So that's great. Thank you guys all for participating in that. We really appreciate it. So before we get started, I just want to run through our forward-looking statement here. So just as a reminder, all the information provided during this presentation and discussion is based on opinions. The information provided on this document does not and is not intended to constitute legal advice. Instead, all the information and content and materials are for general information purposes only. Just as a reminder, also, we do talk a little bit about contracting, and I think we're going to talk a bit about waivers today. And we're not attorneys. We're not offering legal advice. We've been in this business for a bit, and we're just offering our opinions and what we think are best practices and what we've learned. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our CEO here at Meeting Sites Pro, Michelle Hardy, who's going to come up and take it from here.
Thanks, Alyssa. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Welcome, everybody, to Live Meetings Update 2020 and beyond. I'm Michelle Hardy, the CEO of Meeting Sites Pro. And Meeting Sites Pro is a full-service worldwide meeting management company. And we have been in business for 20 years as of March of 2020. Our big celebration was postponed due to COVID. And as you guys know, everything started to shut down in March of 2020. In late April, I realized that this was going to be a longer term problem that we were having, and COVID was going to be here to stay for a while. And I started reaching out to industry leaders from across the country, a lot of whom had lost their jobs, been furloughed, and some of you who are on the call I've reached out to and talked to you because a lot of people were feeling lost, not knowing how to navigate forward. Some felt isolated, some felt depressed. And so as I was talking, I was feeling very discouraged, like I didn't know how I could help and what I could do to make a difference. So in May, I started bringing leaders together from across the country, and we started doing think tanks about how to have meetings face-to-face with safety top of mind, coming up with some best practices to try to figure out how to navigate and move forward with this. And that was very successful, and I got a lot of positive comments on that. And we started doing these weekly Thursday ones with the idea of really wanting to elevate each other, inspire, to share resources, to give hope, and really, in overall, to get back to business. That was the purpose of these meetings, and it's why we started having them to begin with. So that's a little bit of background, and I wanted to make sure that we keep that in mind when we go forward. This is a positive place to be sharing information, and our goal of this is that you guys get at least one tangible resource, at least one. I'm hoping you get several of them that you take with you after this as you move forward through your day. So I'd like to bring on now Jessica Pearson from my team. Every week I kick this off where I start off with some of the questions that we've had from the previous weeks and some of the things that you guys asked for us to cover. And so we're gonna start off right now with Jessica talking a little bit about waivers. There's been a lot of questions about that, and I didn't actually address it last week to some of you that were on the call that asked about this. So I'm going to kick off this week with Jessica talking a little bit about what we have found out about waivers, both from our research and also I've been on a lot of calls with attorneys asking these questions. And so it's really important that we cover it. So Jessica, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. As a preface to this conversation, again, we're not attorneys. This isn't legal advice. This is just, as Michelle said, the perspective we've gotten from our research, our experience, and our communications with attorneys, especially in recent months. And as a note on this, every meeting should be considered as an individual. We see that in all of our details, but in this arena too, you should look at the specific needs of your meeting, the specific needs of your client to determine whether a waiver might be necessary. The basic idea behind the waiver is you're asking your attendees to sign that they understand there's a risk and they're not going to hold you as the meeting planner or the venue or the client responsible for any harm that might come to them. That said, in our experience and in our discussions, we've really found that these waivers really don't hold a lot of weight. And essentially what it means is that if you're negligent, you've done this meeting wrong, you're probably at fault whether you have a waiver or not. And if you've followed all the regulations, followed all the recommendations, you're hosting your meeting safely, you're not going to be negligent, you don't have reckless conduct, and even if you don't have a waiver, you're not going to be held liable. A lot of this centers around the assumption of risk. And what this means is that if the attendee goes into a situation knowing the risk involved, they're not able to have any recourse in terms of harm they might incur. Especially in this situation, you know, unless they're living under a rock, they're aware of coronavirus, they're aware of the issues surrounding these meetings. And in attending the meeting, even though, again, as we've been talking about, we can do them safely, they're still aware that there's that inherent risk just being around people. So in knowing that if they attend the meeting anyway, regardless of whether you have a waiver, they probably can't hold you responsible for anything. In addition, there's this consideration of your assumption of duty. By having them sign a waiver, you're agreeing that you had a duty to keep them safe, when in reality, you really didn't. It's a situation affecting everyone. It's a global situation. You don't really have any personal responsibility for it, except to follow the recommendations and guidelines set out by the federal, local, and state governments. So as long as you're doing that, you're not being negligent. Again, a waiver probably isn't necessary. There's a couple other considerations we've talked about, the optics and PR ideas of signing a waiver. We think you're probably better off focusing on the education piece of it. You know, let your attendees know what safety precautions you're doing rather than just having them sign a blanket saying that you're not responsible for anything.
Can you imagine
and then
starting off your meeting with if you agree to come, you could die?
Yeah, exactly. Whereas you might as well just send them, here's what we're doing to make sure you're safe. And that
Exactly.
goes a long way in the safety of your meeting. And then, like we've been saying, just making sure you're following those guidelines, following that those regulations, and making sure you're not being negligent at all.
And then
Is
don't
what is
forget,
more important than a waiver.
absolutely, and don't forget to consult your own attorney for your specific situation to get advice. That'll be helpful. And during this time frame, I had asked Jessica to go out to a few hundred of our HCP participants to see, you know, how are they feeling about face-to-face meetings in the current environment. And so Jessica has some results to share of those on a couple slides here.
Yeah, so these results were really encouraging to us. Those have been on the meetings in the past have seen these already. But this first one was really encouraging to us because, again, we were polling healthcare professionals and we were polling the people who actually attended our meetings. And if you look at this chart, this first question is people who just prefer in-person meetings. That was over 16% of our respondents. The second question was those who prefer both or enjoy both formats but prefer the in-person. That was over 55% of our respondents, and really just with 70% of the people we polled really excited about getting back to face-to-face meetings. That really encouraged us. and made us want to really look at how to do these safely, which leads into the next question. We also asked our respondents if they were hesitant about face-to-face meetings, what procedures and policies could be put in place to make them less nervous. And we learned a lot of the things we've been talking about. Social distancing had 91% of the people agree that that was important to them. Use of face masks, the increased sanitation in the meeting spaces, it goes down, but this is what's really been guiding our discussion and what we're prioritizing in setting up these meetings.
It's fantastic. And then Jessica, recently you traveled, and really what I'd like you to do is give some of your experience of this last weekend of your stay at a hotel from a guest perspective, what they did to make you feel safe.
Yeah, and I think to start this, I'd admittedly been a lot more cautious about traveling than Michelle has been. So she was really overjoyed to see me actually go stay at a hotel and experience this firsthand. I actually felt really safe, and that's admitting that I had a lot of trepidation about that. I did drive, I didn't fly anywhere, so I don't have any background on the plane part of it. But at the hotel, I felt really safe. Walking into the front desk, you could see the directional arrows. You could see everything set up for front social distancing there. There was plexiglass in front of the attendant. He was wearing a mask. He handed me a bunch of papers detailing the procedures the hotel is doing, what they've cleaned, what their amenities are open. They had, I thought, this really cool idea with the pool in that they divided all the guests into different categories. So some of the guests were pink, some of the guests were purple, some of them were green, and we each had a different time slot for the pool on each day that rotated throughout the day. So first day we were there, we had like the morning slot. The next day we had the afternoon slot, and that's how they guided how many people could be at the pool. And I thought that was really cool. They also gave me a link to the mobile menu, so there were no menus in the room. Upon getting to the room, the remotes were wrapped, the paper towels were sealed. I thought it was very clean and very safe, and I enjoyed my stay.
Okay, so can you tell me, was there anything that you would have liked to have them had done differently or to make you feel more safe? Is there anything else you can add that they could have done?
Yeah, and I think this might be my personal opinion. I don't know if other people agree with me, but I think I would have felt safer if upon entering the room, I had had access to some sort of, cleaning supply, wipes, a spray and paper towels or something, just because even though I do trust them to have cleaned the room, I do trust that. I think I would have felt a lot more at ease and a lot safer had I had some control over that and been able to just double verify that I did a quick wipe too.
Thanks for that. It does help to make you feel like you have some control by having those wipes handy, in my opinion as well. Okay, so we have been planning and gearing up for face-to-face meetings for a while now and coming up with best practices. We have a 650-person meeting coming up in less than 45 days at the Sheraton in Denver. And you've been working really hard with Alyssa and team to coordinate this and make sure that all of our best practices for safety being first in this COVID environment are set up. Can you share some of the gigantic differences that we've put in place for this meeting?
Yeah, so this is a 650-person meeting. It lasts 2 days and has breakfast, lunch breaks. One interesting part of this meeting is it is families. So of those 650 people, we have about 100 that are kids, and then another 50 or so that are speakers, staff, registration teams, that sort of stuff. So we really only have about 500 people sitting in the general session, and we have them set in couples. You can see an example of one of our general session diagrams below. They're set 2 couples at a 72-inch round with 6 feet between tables, everything 6 feet apart. And we actually have 3 general session rooms. So they're all set up really exactly like this. And then you can see the diagram in the right-hand corner. We're planning on broadcasting the content from one general session to the other 2. So everybody in all 3 rooms, they'll be separated and they'll be seeing the same content and hearing the same audio. And we're using a lot of these same setup principles in our breakout rooms, which you'll see on these diagrams next. We had a couple ideas for setting these smaller rooms. One's just those same 72-inch rounds with 2 couples. The other is setting people at a cocktail round. That's what you'll see in the middle. That really allows us to use the space in the room more for walking space rather than taking up that space with tables. And so we thought that was really innovative and cool. And then the other one's just a traditional classroom set We do still set for 2 per 6 foot, but again, it's because they're couples, so those family units can sit at the same table.
That's what I was going to bring up. And in the middle one where the little cocktail rounds are used, if this wasn't a couple, we would have one person at each of those cocktail rounds.
Exactly.
And that's social distance. And at a 6 foot, we've done a lot of research and educated ourselves very well. What's the maximum number of individuals you can fit at a 6 foot with social distancing?
Yeah, really to maintain true social distancing, you can't put more than 3 people at those 72-inch rounds to maintain 6 foot between anyone facing each other.
Great. So, and this is a government piece of business, and no, we don't have assigned seating for this program, but we are asking them to go back to the same seats. We're trying to keep them in the same rooms the whole time. Another best practice, most of you know this by now, is to rotate your speakers instead of rotating the participants at these programs. But this will give you a really good idea of different setups that we're currently doing for this program. The aisleways, Jess, can you talk to us a little bit about those aisleways?
Yeah, so in the bigger rooms, we really try and have 12-foot aisleways so that each aisle is a back and forth, or at least 1 or 2 aisleways in the room can go both directions. In these smaller rooms, we mostly just have 6 feet in between the tables, and then we'll have, in between the chairs, and we'll have directional arrows showing that some are down aisleways and some of them are exit aisleways.
Yeah, perfect. And then will you talk a little bit about the entry and exits?
Yeah, so again, it's hard to tell in these smaller rooms because a lot of times we do only have one doorway for people to go in and out of. But again, we're talking about 15, 20 people in a room rather than 150. If you look at that general session diagram we had put up, we have designated entrances and designated exits. And we've actually put a lot of thought into that in terms of making sure there's not crossover between the attendees, making sure there's a convenient exit near the restrooms, so that you don't just have people going in between sessions, you have them going to the restrooms too. And so we wanted to make sure that was convenient and safe as well.
And then we've talked, you and I, quite extensively about something we call a pre-arrival experience. And we've talked a lot about in context of a hotel's pre-arrival experience. But talk a little bit about our pre-arrival experience on how we're setting up our participants, because and those of you that are on know that, I mean, there's a duty of care for us as planners. There's also a duty of care for the suppliers we're working with, but there's also a duty of care for the participants. The attendees have a responsibility in this as well. So just talk a little bit about the pre-arrival experience and how we're trying to educate and set them up so that they follow our guidelines and procedures.
Yeah, I think we've put a big focus on that pre-arrival experience. One of the big things has been especially sending out information about registration so that when they get on site, they're not shocked when there's not a registration desk for them to go to. We're doing a very decentralized registration process to this, where really 15 to 20 people have one representative. They'll meet with them individually. They'll get the very limited materials they're going to get on site, as most of those are going to be virtual. But it's been really important to us to communicate to people ahead of time what that registration process is going to look like, what their arrival experience is going to look like, what they'll see when they arrive to the meeting space, and what cleaning procedures they can expect to have done. And we try and get that to them ahead of time so that if nothing else, half the people at least that are coming are aware of what they're going to see and aren't shocked when they're like, oh, there's only 2 people at these rounds, or things are a lot more spread out than they were expecting.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about the food and beverage and how, I mean, it's a large group to try to feed them. How are you doing that?
Yeah, the food and beverage is sort of similar actually to what we're doing with the general sessions. Like I said, everybody's going to be divided into 3 general sessions. There's 2 sections of a ballroom on the floor that's on the screen now, and then there's a 3rd ballroom in another part of the hotel. In this area where there's 2 ballrooms next to each other, we have the food and beverage set in the foyer. We're going to be doing a manned buffet. So those buffets you're seeing, there'll be an attendant behind a plexiglass wall. The attendees will meet them kind of at the front of the buffet, go through the 3 or 4 food items, and get a covered plate at the end. You can see how those lines go through. Everybody's going to arrive with the green arrows, go all the way around, and then be separated into 4 different lines where they'll go through the buffet, stop at the drink session, and then head into the general session room.
Perfect.
And if you go to the next slide, there's a couple pictures of what that food and beverage process is going to look like. In the bottom left, you can see what those buffets will look like with the plexiglass, the rope and stanchion to be guiding the line. The top right shows kind of what that'll look like as well. And in the top left, there's that plate with the cover, which I'm sure we've all seen before, but you're generally not handed it, you know? Generally, you just see that on the plates that the servers are serving, and that's taken off. In these circumstances, we would leave those on, give that to the attendee, and those pick them up once they've removed them at their own seats.
And then we're doing some service where we're handing them a plate like this when they walk into a room as well. So just to keep that clear. Talk a little bit about the coffee service. We have a picture of it here that we've showed every week, and the difference that we're adding something to that. But just talk a little bit about that setup.
Yeah, so the idea behind the coffee service is really similar to the manned buffet, in that you'll have that buffet station, you'll have a plexiglass guard, all the coffee and everything will be behind the attendant. They'll be filling those cups, passing them through the plexiglass guard, and then we'll have a separate table next to this with prepackaged condiments. We're making really sure to have signage on that table saying, please take your coffee back to your table to assemble, and they'll just be picking up, again, the prepackaged condiments from that table, heading back to their own seats and assembling their coffee.
And how long, like in a typical, when we do this size of a program, how long does it typically take us to serve the group in the past prior to COVID? And then can you give an estimate at how much time you think it's going to take now, and we're in this COVID timeframe?
Yeah, so for example, our breakfast used to go very fast. This is a government group. They're typically very punctual. There's not a lot of flow. So generally breakfast will start at 7:30, and by 7:45, we're looking around like, oh, I guess that's it. You know, we're running crazy for 15 minutes, getting everyone served, and then really it's just a trickle in after that. But in this COVID situation, we're trying to keep up that speed of lines, but in keeping in mind safety, that's really just going to change, and we're okay with that. I really think breakfast is going to start taking, 40, 45 minutes to really get everyone through.
Yeah, and I think flexibility is the name of the game right now. We're, again, doing that pre-arrival experience. So we're setting up the participants to know in advance that things are going to take a little longer, and you got to build those into your agendas and talk to your clients about building those into agendas just to set up success, because it's fine if everybody knows about it up front, but it becomes an issue if they don't and they're surprised by it on site. There's often boxed meals. There's Alex is saying that how will they be served in this new environment? I thought we had addressed that, but just real quick, because I don't think Alex grabbed that. How are we serving in this new environment? And you're going to stack them? He's asking, will they be stacked on the tables, or will there be an attendant handing them out? And I think we said we're going to have an attendant hand those out as they enter the room. But as far as other service, the service with the plexiglass or the buffet line, that's a touchless one, they pick it up at one side, they go through the line, and they get handed their meals at the other end of it. So they're just slid out to them, right? With the lid on it. Okay. Can you also share any other logistical kind of management that we've put in place for purposes of our audiences knowing other things that we're doing to keep our guests safe?
So we have the social distance set up. We have these revised food and beverage procedures. A lot of what our other planning details have operated around is things like directional arrows, making sure that we have signage all over the hotel, all over the meeting space, saying things like, thank you for social distancing, please remember to wash your hands, please remember to use hand sanitizer, reminding folks not to touch the doors when at all possible, reminding them to wear their masks, giving them a contact information if they have any questions, if they have any concerns, really making sure that communication is key. And then to the note about hygiene, having those hand sanitizer stations all around, having hand washing stations all around. And then to go back to what I said earlier about really putting the attendees in control of their own situation. We've asked this hotel to offer some cleaning supplies in the individual meeting rooms. They're obviously going to be cleaning between each session, and they're using the electrostatic sprayers at lunch times and overnight. But we're also, again, giving attendees, wipes in the meeting rooms so that when they sit down at their spot, if they feel like it needs one additional layer to make them feel safe, they have the opportunity to do that.
And this has been a collaboration between the hotels. I mean, this is some of the stuff the hotels have their policies. We have found some of the clients we're working with have their own policies. Then you have the federal policies and laws, you have state, you have regional. So there's a lot of things you have to check with on what the recommendations are. These things that we're recommending have been best practices from our think tanks and from all the meetings we've been doing since this pandemic started. And they've been best practices from people, leaders from across the country that we've been discussing this with. And when I bring the panel on, you're going to hear they're having meetings now face to face, and they're all really committed to doing these right. And they've put in a lot of these best practices, even more in place to make sure everybody feels safe as we get back to business. So I hope that.
Another quick detail on the signage. I know there's been a lot of questions over kind of who pays for this. Like Michelle said, we've seen a big collaboration on this. So in terms of signage, we're providing some, our clients providing some, the hotel's also providing some. It's really in our best interest to have that communication with the attendees. So we're really kind of attacking it from all sides, so to speak.
And Jessica, did you mention the temperature checks?
I didn't actually. We're doing manual temperature checks when people enter the food and beverage room. So when they're standing in line right before they go to that buffet, they'll get a temperature check. If they register a higher temperature, we'll ask them to step aside. You know, sometimes things happen. Sometimes you're outside, it's hot, you just came from the gym. There's other reasons that your temperature might be higher temporarily. So we'll ask them to step aside, check them in 10 to 15 minutes. If they do still register a higher temperature, we'll have a separate room to set them aside. And then in the planning process, we've been coordinating with both the hotel security team as well as local health departments to refer them to a medical professional to guide them on what to do next. The important thing is just to verify those cases ahead of time and then isolate.
Perfect. And can you talk a little bit about how we're handling pre-cons, because we're doing those different now?
Yeah, so the major pre-con that we normally do with everybody from the hotel, there's 30 people in a room talking about the event, that we're moving virtual prior to our travel day. We'll do like a Zoom meeting that has housekeeping, AV, valet, front desk, banquets, the culinary team, all in a Zoom meeting to discuss the meeting beforehand. And then on site, we'll do just a walkthrough with, you know, our CSM, our banquet team, maybe an audiovisual person depending on the meeting, and we'll walk through the actual meeting space. So rather than doing, you know, a BEO review by a person, we'll do that walking through the actual meeting space and do kind of a mini pre-con that way.
Perfect. Thank you, Jessica, for being on today. I really appreciate it. We're going to start off with our panelists, and keep the questions coming, you guys. I see them on here, and if I haven't gotten to you yet, I will get to you. A lot of those questions you have on there are going to be best answered by our panelists, which are getting ready to come on here in just a moment. We're going to introduce them one at a time, and we're going to start off with Joe Barrow. Joe, welcome. He's from the Director of Sales at the Colonial Williamsburg. I'm really glad to have you on, Joe, and just grateful for you being here. And I'd like you to share, if you could, some updates on gatherings in Virginia.
Thanks, Michelle. It's great to be on. It's great to be on with the folks here, and it's great to have meetings. It's been a long time. So yeah, we've held meetings since early June, and we'll get into more of that later. Right now in Virginia, we're in phase 3, which means we can have meetings of up to 250 people in one place. The eastern side of Virginia, especially the Virginia Beach area, has been put back into phase 2 at this point, where you can have up to 50 people in one place. And that's due to rising cases, you know, in that area as people get out to the beaches. But that's only expected to last about maybe 2 weeks. So we're excited. Phase 3 is good, and then you know, we'll see how things go going forward.
And I know you've been having meetings. That's very exciting. I know you just had one recently for 50 people. Can you tell me a little bit about what type of group it was, where they traveled from, and just talk about the setups?
Absolutely. Okay. So it was early June. The interesting thing about this meeting is it's a corporate meeting, and we were still in phase 2, or excuse me, phase 1. And so at that point, they could not hold the meeting. And there were 45 people. There's a corporate executive group. They're top executives from the chief operating officer all the way down. and they wanted to get together. It was the first time they had met in quite a while as well. They had all worked remote and so forth, had manufacturing facilities. So as you can imagine, lots for them to talk about with manufacturing and the employees coming back, to the manufacturing floor and so forth. So we literally, the governor sent us into phase 2 to allow 50 people or less. And they immediately called up, said, we'd like to put this together. And we put the meeting together in 4 days.
That's outstanding. When you were doing it, do you have any like best practices that you can share with a group? That's the question that's coming in. Best practices for that?
Absolutely. First and foremost is communication. Communicate, collaborate with a meeting planner. We had multiple calls with a meeting planner, obviously following the guidelines of the CDC and our governor. We used Marriott as a resource. The lodge here is a Marriott Autograph Collection hotel. So, they were, really running 100 miles an hour, putting resources out. So the interesting thing about this for us and the challenge was putting a meeting together in 4 days at the same time that we were putting all of our processes in place. And, and we didn't have as much staff, we had to furlough most of our staff. So there were a lot of challenges, but the communication was key, both with the customer and internally. And one thing that I'll say that we did for best practice, especially for those folks out there who may have not held a meeting up to this point, we did a physical walkthrough internally with our operations team. And we walked through the space as the attendee would walk through the space. And after we had put the signage out and everything, and just, does this make sense from an attendee perspective, asked all the what if questions. And I think that was very beneficial for us to catch things before we got to the actual meeting.
That's great. And that's some great advice. The communication is key. Can you talk a little bit about your food and beverage, how the delivery was and really how it flowed? There's somebody in there that's asking specifically to have a real discussion about not just beverage, but the food flow.
Absolutely. The last slide was kind of good as far as laying out how we did the breaks and so forth. This is an interesting set. It was a hollow square, and then we set tables behind it because we didn't want to stretch this out to, like 6,000 square feet. And then we put, you can kind of see in the corners there, we put the screens in each corner of the room. So all 4 corners had screens. So for the food and beverage standpoint, it was 1 per 6-foot table, plenty of room. So we preset bottled drinks. And then right before the meeting started, we would preset a glass of ice, for each attendee. And then we would come back and refresh that as we went forward. When it came time for the breaks, they would break. We came in with break items. We set those down at each individual workstation. And so that limited, obviously, the contact with our folks. All of our folks were wearing, the servers were wearing gloves and all the PPE devices, masks and so forth. For the meals, we did not do any buffets. We did have, for the reception, plexiglass up at the bar. We preset salads while they were out at the reception outside. It's good to use outdoor space if you can. So they had the reception outside the meeting room. Salads were preset. And then when they came in, we served, plated food at the table. The coffee break in the next slide, as you folks mentioned in previous to this, we set up a coffee break area with plexiglass, and we had an attendant, fix their coffee. And you can also see the signage on the floors. You talked about flow a little bit earlier. If you have wide hallways like this, you can obviously, take the flow down one side and then back up the other side. We thought about flow, into the restrooms, for example, in and out of the ballrooms. So in this particular meeting, we were lucky because we had 2 doors on each side of the ballroom. So you could have an enter and an exit door on each side. And then we had clear signage all the way through so that the attendees, wouldn't have to think twice about it. Having said that, they get into the room, things happen, they forget to go out the right door, and you just have to be there and be flexible and make sure to point them in the right direction.
Absolutely. And then did you use microphones at the table in those settings, or was it hard to hear, or what did you do acoustically?
We did not need microphones for that meeting. They did have a few folks call in, so there was a speakerphone there, but microphones were not needed in that meeting.
Perfect. Okay, thank you for that. I really appreciate it. I'm going to bring on our next speaker. I'm going to introduce Lynn DeFrancisco from Hilton, Orange County, a partner of mine. We do quite a few meetings with them, so I really appreciate you being here, Lynn. And if you can just talk a little bit about the gatherings in Orange County, California.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, in Orange County, we just went back to phase 1. We had gotten into phase 3 where we were able to have meetings of 20% of capacity. However, 2.5 weeks ago, we did move backwards due to the increase in cases, which did give us a little bit of a challenge here at the hotel, one that we had to come up with some solutions for because we were in the middle of a program with 350 people in attendance. So currently, we're not able to have meetings in Orange County. We are hoping that this Friday that changes and we're able to go back into having meetings again. All of our guests are required to wear masks in the hotel, and that is mandated by the state of California as well as our brand at this time. The only area that we can do food and beverage is outside on the patios. So our restaurant is open, but we're able to have food and beverage offerings outdoors.
Perfect. Can you talk a little bit, Lynn, about the 350-person meeting that you had? I know we had talked briefly, and it sounded like there was some exciting things that were going on with it. So can you share that with us?
So yeah, we had a regionalized meeting. It was a religious group. It was from the Western region, and it was a theater-style seating set. So we did that social distancing. We had breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the meeting for 350 people. Our plan was to do plated meals, and we used 3 different ballrooms for that. However, in the middle of the program, new guidelines did come out, and we could not have 350 people in the ballroom. So we had to put our brains together and come up with a plan, being that we're in the middle of the program. So what we did, we moved it outside from the ballroom, and we had the event on the top of our parking garage under tent. The sides of the tent could not go online because then that would make it an indoor environment. So it was just the top of the tent. Thankfully, we were able to execute that successfully. And then we switched our options for food and beverage to a grab and go. And we did have a table set up, and the attendees came through and picked up their meal and then sat outdoors to enjoy their meal. It was a really key learning. It was timeliness, because we really had to put our heads together and come up with a solution in a very short period of time. And we also had to partner with our event coordinators to really come up with a plan financially, because it was quite expensive to move into that arena. And we did share the cost of that.
Yeah, that took a lot of hoops. And it's really, we talked about it, you had a client that was very flexible as well. And so the communication between the client and your team needed to be really in sync in order to make sure that happened successfully.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's super, super important. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Lynn. I appreciate you sharing that. I'm going to move on to our next guest, Cornelia Young, Senior Director of Events, Hyatt Regency Orlando. Welcome, Cornelia. You've been on a few of these and are a great partner. Appreciate having you on. And can you tell us a little bit about some of the gatherings rules that are happening currently for Orlando?
Yep, thank you. It's great to be back. Not much has changed for us. I'm on the other side in Orange County, Florida, and we are in phase 2, which we have been for several weeks. We really don't have a numbers restriction on meetings, but we can only seat up to 50% of our regular occupancy as long as we can guarantee 6-foot distancing. So in a lot of the setups, it negates the 50% and it's less than that. At least we don't have a restriction on it. In Orange County, outside of events, bars are still closed, restaurants are serving, but you can't just go get a drink.
Perfect, thank you for that. And then can you talk a little bit about the, when you guys online are attendees, you may have heard about the Together Again Expo that just happened last week. It was a hybrid with 1,600 people in person, and it had thousands more that participated virtually. I was one of those that participated virtually. It looked like it went off very well. Cornelia is our eyes and ears on the floor, who was actually there at the meeting and really engaged and talked to some of the people who were putting this together. And I'm really curious from an attendee standpoint to hear what your experience was like and what they did to make you feel safe for that.
Absolutely. And I believe you do have the video. So before I go into that, maybe we should run the video and then I'll talk a little bit more about it on the other side, the planning, the setup, and the execution.
That's perfect. We're going to have the video come up now. Again, this was Together Again Expo, took place at the Orange County Convention Center in Orlando, Florida. So here it is. Yeah, that was great. So kick us off with your experience in being there in person and actually seeing it.
Yes, it was interesting getting ready for it because obviously that's what we do on year round, but then we don't because now everything has changed. And working with the Orange County Convention Center as well as with Visit Orlando, there was a ton of information that went out ahead of time, which was really great because it got you ready to do it the right way. And as we entered and as we set up, we had our temperature checks and we got our stickers that we were okay to come in. And setup was quite strict, and you had your move-in times and you social distance from everybody else. And then once the doors opened, it continued like that. And I felt really good about it. We did have the occasional person that, where the mask slides a little bit, or you could tell that they really didn't want to wear it. I was in the hotel cluster of exhibits, and I could hear at the other booths as well that we continuously reminded guests to, hey, you need to put this back on. And the handful that, you forget or it slides were immediately willing to cooperate. Overall, it was a really great experience. They had the arrows, you saw it in the video, of how to walk to the aisles and how to come down and how to flow through the entire event space, so you really didn't miss anything. There was good flow, there was good communication. It was not a selling exhibit, it was more a let's showcase that we can do this exhibit.
That's great. And I know they had ambassadors on the floor that their sole responsibilities was walking around and making sure there was social distance, that people were wearing their masks, and they were very well trained on what to say and how to approach somebody to kind of facilitate that. And I do know that Together Again Expo also did a lot of pre-education, that we always talk about, that pre-arrival education's key. I saw a lot of those educational pieces go out in advance, so that everybody knew kind of when you got there what to expect. It wasn't a surprise, Cornelia, when you walked and you saw what was going on, because you already knew that was happening. I know they had thermal temperature checks as well. They not only had it when you entered, but they also had it on the show floor, which I felt really good about. And then they used the disinfectants. They had people actually, you could see disinfecting throughout the program, but they did a thorough overnight. They did it between sessions. When the speakers were up on stage and they alternated speakers, they cleaned up, disinfected those chairs and everything that was up on stage. The speakers I saw didn't have masks on, but from what I understand, they had the mask on. When they sat down, they took the mask off. Correct. And so I just wanted to make that clear for the audience who was concerned over that there was a methodical way they went about doing that.
Yes, and in some of the videos you couldn't really see it, but they were truly separated from each other on the stage and did not take them off until they were seated.
I mean, I'm so happy. I really was hoping MPI would have been the ones that came out first and did a big meeting like this. And I was really happy to see anybody doing it, honestly. And they did it. And so far, this just happened on Friday. I know they're doing some contact tracing so that they're aware of participants afterwards. And so far, it's been no negative news. So that's good news. And I know that from your attendee perspective, how safe did you feel in that environment? That's a big question that keeps popping up from a participant area. And if there's anything they could have done differently that would have made you feel more safe.
And actually, no. Communication was fantastic. The ambassadors were great, and you just saw in the video, Patty Olinger was one of the panelists, and she is the president of GBAC. And the great thing was that on purpose, because both the convention center and my property were GBAC certified, and we did what we think was right, and then had them come, and they actually did an inspection of both areas, and both the convention center and, I'm proud to say, my hotel, we passed with flying colors, which made me feel really great.
That's fantastic. Did you see any pushback, or did you hear of any pushback on attendees, like with temperature checks at all?
Not with temperature checks at all, and they were really easy, and you had a choice of the little gun or going through the scanner, and the scanner is seconds to walk through there. We did have the occasional attendee that didn't want to wear the mask and just was uncomfortable with it. But the workaround is obviously the face shields, which most of us have now. So if somebody can't wear a face mask or just simply doesn't want to, we have face shields that we hand out, and so did the convention center.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. Can you talk a little bit? I know you've had several meetings, but I'm going to specifically ask you about one you had for 150 people recently. Can you talk a little bit about what type of client that was and where the attendees came from and your setup and all of that?
Yes, and it was an interesting one to start out with because it was a multi-level marketing company. So it is not the same people working together at all times or one company that has one philosophy. It is truly individuals attending a conference. They did come from all over. It was local, regional, and a handful cross-country. All of the meeting and breakout rooms were set up at 1 per 6 foot, as you can see here. In one of the breakouts, we did run into an opportunity, and the small group decided that they didn't want to sit at 1 per 6 foot and rearranged their room. And we had a conversation with them, and really what we learned is that we need to make sure that our attendees realize it's not just about them. It is also about our colleagues that now have to go into that room and service that room. And that kind of made sense to them. And they realized that they need to think not only about themselves and stop doing it, which was great. But as you can see,
nice, Cornelia, because that's a really hard conversation to have. And I've had hotels that I've heard say that what their viewpoint is that's they get the group's space so they can do what they want with it. And in this environment, I don't think that's a responsible thing to be saying, and that's not a responsible message. It's kind of like the hotels that initially when they came out were, well, you can wear a mask or you don't have to wear a mask. If everybody's not doing it, it doesn't benefit anybody. So
yes.
It's really, really important that those conversations are had. So kudos to you guys for taking that on. And they did in the end up making the change, right? And stuck
Yes.
with it after that. Good.
Yes, they did adhere to it, and it's learning, right? This is it's one of my biggest takeaways from all of this, that it's perfectly okay not to do everything 100% at the start. We need to learn from it and make it better. We as a company, you probably have seen that a ton of hotel companies have now officially gone to mandatory face mask wearing in all public areas and meeting rooms. One of the things that we have implemented after this is that every single meeting planner not only gets the know before you go that we already talked about that they sent out to their attendees, but we have a conversation with them, both the meeting planner and the person that is in charge of the meeting or executes the meeting, and ask them at the beginning of the meeting to make an announcement to their entire audience of what the rules, regulations, and expectations are, so the audience understands the person that puts this on buys into this as well and expects you to wear a face mask.
Yeah, and Audrey Kerr's saying that she agreed. She thinks that the meeting organizer should have that chat with the hotel together, that shouldn't only be put on the hotel as the hotel's responsibility. So that's good. Can you talk a little bit about, Cornelia, about the food and beverage, the service, the layout, the hygiene setup for these meetings that you put together at your hotel?
Absolutely. So what you see in the center is our care station, and we have that in each area, public area of an event. And on the top are hand sanitizers with towels and like paper towels and tissue papers. Underneath that little box that looks different from the tissue box actually has gloves in it if anybody would care to wear gloves. And then we have additional face masks available if something happens to your mask, if it breaks or if it's soiled and you would need a fresh one. Those stands are throughout the area. At the entrance of each door, in this case, the doors are closed because they had private meetings in there, so we couldn't prop them open. We have the sanitizer, and then we have a tissue so you can touch the door handle. Then the beverage station, this one is an attended one. So we had ice on it. You can see it, it's covered behind him. All the soft drinks and the waters are chilled, but if a guest wanted ice, the server could provide the ice. And then the picture of the food that we threw in is actually from the convention center, but I thought it was a genius idea. And they served a meal on one plate. And I thought it was really cute because on the top right-hand corner, you have your appetizer with your little shrimp and salad, the croissant as your roll with the butter. And then your main course was in the center with a little fruit and then a mini dessert on the top left on the side. And I thought it was a cute idea that I wanted to share with you.
It's like going back to school when we used to go get our trays and go through, and then that's what it looked like at the end of it. Not quite as nice.
And I thought it was a genius idea because it cuts down on touch points, right? The server comes twice to the table. First to give you your beverage, and second to give you your meal, and then no more touch points until they clear. And I thought it was a really smart idea and worth sharing.
Thank you for being on here, Cornelia, and for bringing those great ideas. I'm going to welcome in our next guest, Jim Tolbert from Stein Collection in Utah. Hi, Jim. Welcome. Glad to have you on.
Thanks
We've been
so
working
much.
together probably for more than 30 years. We're aging ourselves here, so it's nice.
It's been a while, I know.
Yeah. So can you tell me a little bit about the gatherings in Park City, Utah?
Sure. We're in Utah. We've been fortunate to be in phase 3. Utah is doing it by colors, red, orange, yellow, and then the final phase will be green. So we're in the yellow phase. There are some modifications within counties, if you will, within that yellow phase. We are able to have meetings. So basically they've recategorized meetings separate from, say, a concert, for example. So the number is 999, somewhat arbitrary, but you can do meetings up to that number, gatherings, if you will, other than concerts, but you must have the appropriate square footage to maintain the social distancing. So if your square footage mandates 10 people at a 6-foot dent, that's what you can do. So that's really the way Utah has positioned it. There are some minor variances between counties. For example, in Summit County, where we sit here in Park City, there's a mask mandate, so that everybody must wear a mask in public. If there is an opportunity for you to run into somebody else inside that 6-foot bubble, if you will. So that is where we are in that regard. But once you go into, you wear your mask into a restaurant or into your meeting room, once you're seated, you can remove it. So that's basically the guideline in general. In terms of other restrictions, really we take it from the CDC down to the state, which the state hands down to the counties. So all those mandated procedures are just pulled down through to it hits your particular city. So that's really where we sit. However, we're in phase 3 of 4.
Fantastic. And you've been having some meetings. You recently had a 40 to 50 person meeting. Can you tell us a little bit about that meeting and some of your setup?
Sure. So this particular meeting was supposed to be about 70 people originally, and it was a financial based meeting. This is some opportunities where we were looking at, basically when we do the diagrams, we just literally max out the rooms and then back into the sets, and we modify the diagrams per program on an individual basis. So this diagram is actually one that is forthcoming. and a different, we've provided some options to them in terms to get to the numbers they need and how they would do it. Now there's additional things that would go with this in terms of directional arrows. The spacing is maintained at 1/6, but one way in, one way out. Different guidelines and touch points at that in regard to this meeting specifically. I think I sent you another picture of the actual set with, so this is the meeting that we were just talking about. So this is the Stein Ballroom. It goes up to 6,000 square feet, and you'll see this is set for 35 people right now. So you'll notice in the picture, and just as we were mentioning before, not everybody's wearing a mask now, but everybody had to wear it walking into the room. Once they're seated, they can take it off if they choose. You see some people are wearing it, some aren't. You can see up on the stage there where the chairs, there's panelists that would come up and speak, and those chairs are spaced 6 feet apart. They'd have to wear their mask up to the stage, and then once they sat down, they could remove it if they chose to. This meeting was, we had enough square footage here where we don't have directional arrows on the floor due to, we just had enough room between rows to be able to provide distancing. But had this been for 80 people or something, then the set and other components to help guide people in and out to limit touch and distance would have been provided.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to ask just in general for the whole panel, air circulation. We have multiple questions on filtrations and on just circulation in the meeting rooms and your hotels. Can you guys speak to how you're doing that and somebody who'd be concerned about that?
I can jump in if you like. So they've upgraded all our filter systems within the building, guest rooms, meeting spaces, ever to the HEPA qualified filters that filter 99.9% of our particulates. They also now leave fans running, which will circulate the air constantly, even if it's not being heated or cooled. Air is still being circulated just to help remove any potential harmful particles.
Perfect. And I know a lot of the hotels are using electrostatic sprayers. So for some of those that are worried about aerosol transmission, I just think that the electrostatic sprayer actually sprays disinfectant into the air that's supposed to disinfect the area. Is that your guys' understanding of that as well? It's not just on the equipment?
Yeah, it actually goes 360 around. So
Yeah.
it does circulate, absolutely.
Anybody else have any updates that they want to share on your property's filtration?
I really can't talk intelligently about it because I don't understand it. But my director of engineering also told me that we have UV lights installed in the AC system, which kills a ton of bacteria, but I truly can't explain it, how it works.
I do think there's a lot of hotels that are doing a lot of things right now to try to make it safe, whether that's filters, the UV lights, the electrostatic sprayers, the hand sanitizers, which are everywhere throughout hotels to try to help you so that it minimizes you having to go to the bathroom and wash your hands every 5 seconds, right? So you have hand stations where you have the sanitizers to be able to use. So that's been very helpful. From you guys, as far as the attendees, once they get in their seats and they remove their masks, I know from my perspective, once you're in your seat, you're in a 6-foot bubble. I have no trouble with my participants removing masks. How do you guys feel about that, or what's your policy or procedure on that?
I'll jump in. Hyatt just came out with a national policy, and that is exactly what it reflects. You have to wear your mask in all public areas, and walking in and out of the room, once you are safely seated with a 6-foot social distancing, you may remove your mask.
That's our policy as well. Once they get into the room, we require a mask from the time they come into the hotel. We have signage up, and we will. It's kind of a soft. If they don't have a mask, we'll offer them one immediately, and then once they sit down at their either the table or their meeting desk, then they can take it off.
Yeah, Hilton's doing the same guideline as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Lynn. So I know that there's been a lot of question about how, I mean, with the COVID-19, you guys are incurring a lot more cost across the board. And there are some restaurants that are applying a COVID-19 tax. In the short term versus the long term, what is your view on adding fees to try to recoup, not only from a cleaning standpoint, but also social distance 6-foot bubbles are weird, right? I mean, and they eat up a lot of space. So what somebody's wanting to know in the short run, what your plan is versus what the long run plan looks like.
For the Stein, I mean, short term, there's a lot of nuances within the food service that are mandated by the county and everything. So for example, we have a different set of staff that does all the serving on an event, but then you have a secondary set of staff that does all the clearing. So you're limiting touch points, right? So your server is not picking up a plate that a guest had used. It's going a different direction. It's being handled differently in the back of the house, all the cleared utensils, plates, glassware. So that takes almost a third more staff than you would normally have in a meeting scenario. So for the short term, we're absorbing that cost. We're happy to have you there. However, all buffets and all coffee breaks must be attended because we're handling everything. So there are some additional attendant fees that we're asking, for those fees. In this case, we're always flexible, always willing to have a conversation, but that's an extra layer of service and of attendance that you have to have. So it's mandatory. So that's we're trying to get those fees wherever we can. Long term, it's hard to say. At least from my perspective, it could become, if there's a pandemic, then these rules apply, and if there isn't, then these rules apply. I'd be interested to hear what the rest of the panel has to say, because I don't think we know as an industry yet how this is going to fully play out.
Lynn,
I agree.
Go ahead.
I'm looking at long-term plan is really reanalyzing my meeting room rental fees and not automatically waiving those currently if you're having food and beverage as we have in the past. And I'm really keeping a pulse on the competition to make sure that they're in alignment so we go together. We're having a lot of conversations around our community about that in the hotels. So
beautiful. Joe, do you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I would say I agree with the long-term perspective that we really don't know. And, you hope that we get through this pandemic and we get a vaccine and we can get back to some sort of normalcy, because you're in essence shrinking the hotel meeting space in half, in some cases even less. So that's a big discussion as we move forward. Now, for the short term, we're absorbing all the costs as well, and happy to do so. For those folks, our view is that if they're willing to go forward with a meeting during this time, then we'll absorb the cost at this time. But then in the future, we're going to have to make some decisions based on the parameters that are in front of us.
Perfect. Thank you guys for that. And then just as far as if somebody's asking, if somebody's in a meeting room and let's say they're sitting in their 6-foot bubble so they can take off their mask, or they're eating, whatever they're doing that allows that. If someone sneezes or coughs, what to do? I mean, I can't even imagine. I mean, there's allergy season. We're going to sneeze. We're going to cough. People get colds. We're encouraging everybody to stay home. But the question is, what if someone sneezes or coughs? Are we going to get the police on them?
It's definitely a different world, right? We used to sneeze and cough before COVID, and we'll continue to do so. But in part of that pre-arrival package, we send out, all those sanitation points, wash your hands more often. use sanitizer. When you cough or sneeze, cover with an elbow. Those kinds of things. I mean, honestly, I think that's realistically all you can do is, make people as aware, because we're all looking over our shoulders now when somebody sneezes, right? And we're like, how close were they? How far does it go? I remember hearing about it. I don't know. So.
I'm running from them.
Well, if you're in an enclosed room, you also can gauge, was this an allergy sneeze and a one-time sneeze, or is there a continuous opportunity here? And if there is, then we need to step in and figure out what's going on.
And someone's asking, who's responsible for that? That's a really great question. What are your thoughts, Joe? Who's responsible for that?
Yeah, I think it's the individual to start with is responsible. I think everyone understands the rules of engagement, and honestly, we haven't run into that situation. Everybody that's come in our door has understood. But then, yes, if we see an individual potentially putting our staff or other people at risk by their behavior, then it is incumbent upon us to say something and try to remove them from the room. If it keeps going on. But I would say from our perspective, and we've had leisure guests in our doors all summer as well. It's kind of hard not to be aware of the guidelines right now, in this world, and everybody seems to be adhering to them pretty well.
And it's a shared responsibility, right? You need your meeting planning team, because if that poor soul sneezes, that person knows all eyes are on them right now, right? They're already mortified. But if there's a concern, we certainly don't want to march in there and pull that person out. So there needs to be some finesse to it, and we need your help and the staff's help to ask that person, step aside, come on out, let's get you away from here. So it's a shared responsibility that we all need to look after, pretty much everybody, that individual, the other attendees and colleagues.
Absolutely. And that leads me into, if we do identify somebody who is coughing consistently, I look at that as a kind of a safety or security risk, like we have for any policy. So every hotel has a safety and security policy on how you manage risk. And I think those have been updated now to include COVID, I would assume, for all of your properties. As for us, we have safety and security, which takes into consideration what the hotels does as well and what our end client wants. And so it's a collaboration. Again, it goes back to having conversations about all that. But the very first thing that we do is, if we have a concern over a safety or security issue that is a heightened secure, high alert secure, we call 911. And then we contact the hotel security department. That's a pretty typical standard way of dealing with it. On a lower level, if somebody does come in and we're checking them and they have a temperature in the areas where we're doing temp checks, we are just not permitting them to come into the space. We're taking that responsibility as a meeting planning company to say that, if you have a fever, something's wrong. It may not be COVID, could be a flu, could be something else, but something's not right if you have a fever. So we're just asking them to go to the nearest urgent or ER and get checked and cleared before coming back. So that's how we're personally handling that when we're doing the temp checks. We're not hiring any medical staff to do temperature checks. I know some people are. In fact, Cornelia, I believe at the Altogether Expo, they had professional EMTs that were there that they hired to take people's checks. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, thankfully, the EMTs were very bored, which is exactly what we want them to be. And there were multiple companies there that did temperature checks. Some of them were exhibiting, some of them were on the outside and actually checking temperature. There are so many different variations now. There's one, and I know you've shown it in past town halls, where they can scan up to 16 people walking through an arch, and it pings on the people and shows them green or red as they walk through. So there are tons and tons of possibilities now that are actually fairly decent in rental prices. So it's not an arm and a leg.
I have that in my resources at the end, so I have a picture of that.
Okay.
Both you can purchase it and rent it, because that is such a critical piece right now if we want to try to contain this. A lot of my clients are looking at the end as thinking it's the individual's responsibility to know their temperature. They shouldn't come to the meeting with a temperature, and so they're not taking on that responsibility. But it's really an individual decision on how you manage to do this. We're being a little bit more cautious, and before we even got on this call with the panel, we were all talking, and I was just saying, those of us that are ahead of the curve here and having meetings during this time frame, we do want to make sure we're doing these things right, and that we're putting extra care towards making sure that everybody's safety is top of mind. Not that it wouldn't be normally, but just extra cautious. We're doing extra things. And so while this may change, and like as we move along, I may not do temperature checks anymore, it is the short run viewpoint of it. Are any of your hotels doing temperature checks, or is there anything you're doing now that you think may change other than the spatial concerns that are just being dictated by the local area?
We're doing 2 levels. I mean, we're not doing, if we see a guest that we suspect may be ill in some way, whether visibly, then we have protocols. We do take their temperature. We pull them into a secure space, reevaluate, and then if we find that there are symptoms that are consistent, then we have protocols to take them to the hospital and whatnot. But our staff is tested every day. There's guidelines put in place. So we had to go through, when we reopened in July 1, everybody who came back, we all had to go through specific training, COVID training, and we all had to learn the protocols. And there are pretty severe consequences if you're not following them, and if you're found not following. So that's an internal piece for us. But then, in terms of the guests and things, it's so far everybody's been very. Sometimes just a look is all it takes, especially if you have a family walking through with some kids and the kids don't have their masks on. If you just look at the parents, they're like, Sally, put your mask on. And I think in general, most people have been amenable to that, to the reminder, because it's all new still, getting back in face to face. So
absolutely. Okay, and are you guys doing any offsite or any of your gifting? They're saying the in-room amenities, are you changing any of those? This Chana used to have room drops each night and as part of the experience. Is that still happening? And if so, how is it being managed?
We're not.
We haven't. We had a wedding where someone had just a few gifts, and we delivered that, with gloves and so forth before their arrival.
Okay.
But on a large scale, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
Another thing I'll say to the last question is we are also staggering our housekeepers' arrival. So rather than have them all in a room together and going through morning lineup, they'll kind of meet outside. And so for this is your 5 minutes to go down and grab your materials and look at your board and kind of move along about your way to minimize the exposure of our personnel to each other as well.
Perfect. Lynn, do you have anything to add to that as far as what you're doing as far as room drops go?
Yeah, we're not currently doing room drops. Our staff does not enter into a room that is occupied. So we will give those gifts across the desk upon arrival, but not actually in room.
Perfect, which leads me into the sleeping rooms. How are you guys handling the guest arrival and experience as far as your sleeping rooms go? Joe, you want to kick us off with that?
Sure. And I'm assuming you're talking about the condition of the room when they arrive, not the check-in process, right?
Yeah, when they arrive to the room, it's filtration, cleanliness, amenities,
Right.
that stuff.
So we're using the electrostatic sprayers as well. Really neat technology. From my understanding, it kind of wraps around the chair, so to speak. It stays. It's good for days. And then of course we'll go back in, so it's technically good longer than we allow it. So we'll respray. But we're packaging. I saw one photo a while ago, packaging remote controls and things of that nature, making sure you wipe them down, put them in packages. So anything that's a high touch item is packaged in just a thorough cleaning with a sprayer. And then we're minimizing, really, we don't want to go into the room to clean while they're here. And so that's our policy at this point, is when they check in, you know, we have everything set up. If they need something like extra towels or something of that nature, we can deliver to the outside of the room and then go in when they depart to clean it again.
Michelle, I can add to that. We're doing all of those steps, but we also have the Clean Stay program where we actually put a label on the room so it's sealed when the guest arrives. So if that seal is not, if it's broken, they know that somebody has entered that room. The other thing that we've added as an amenity in the room is Lysol sanitizing wipes for the guests in the bathrooms, which is a nice touch.
I actually really like that because it gives each of us control over our environment. Because I often know, even if I go in, I've been like that my whole life. So I bring hand sanitizer and wipes with me, and I'm wiping down light switches, and you know, so having that in the room is just extra comfort in my opinion for how that goes. So I'm going to ask you guys, are you providing PPE at all on guest arrival or in your meeting space? And I know, Cornelia, you kind of showed you are providing it in the meeting space area. So I'd like to just hear from some of you guys if you're providing it in the guest experience when they arrive, and also what you're doing in the meeting rooms.
And I'm going to jump in because I do want to clarify that while we provide it, because in Orange County, Florida, there is a mandate that you have to wear it anyway, we expect our guests to have it. They can't travel, they can't be outside, they can't be in a Uber coming to the hotel without one anyway. We provide replacements or if they need additional ones. So it is not, you're staying here for 5 days, you get a packet for 5 days.
Yeah. So it's just in the instance something breaks for an emergency circumstances. Thank you.
No, also we, in our meeting space, if we see somebody not wearing a mask, that's a nice intro is to offer them a mask because maybe theirs broke.
Yeah.
It's a nice way to address it.
Right.
Fantastic. Anything different from anybody else?
We're at check-in where we used to give away granola and bottled water and, you know, a few different items. It's now face masks, hand sanitizer, the QR codes for all the menus, and maps of the properties to help them get where they want to go. So that's changed. So everybody has it. They should have their own coming in because it's required in the county, but it's an extra, it's backups for all of that.
Perfect. Thank you. And you guys keeping amenities inside your rooms too, inside the guest rooms?
So I'm sorry for interrupting you, Michelle. One of the additional things that we have done, a lot of us now have the keyless entry where you can download it on your phone and use it to enter the room. We have a new application where you can actually, we do the same with the remote where we clean it and we put it in a baggie, but if somebody is still apprehensive, you can now download an app and download the remote on your phone and then use your phone for the TV and control the TV with that.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, we've removed all the collateral.
Thank you. So I was asking about room amenities. Somebody's asking about if you guys are offering, this is a second time that they bring it up, so I'm going to be very clear. Your amenities in the room, the honor bar system, what are you guys doing as far as coffee and honor bars?
We've taken all that out of our rooms.
Same.
Okay.
Same here.
Okay,
Yeah.
so they're out of the rooms. For Angela Tormey, I finally answered your question, I hope. If I didn't, ask it again. So one of the other questions that's come up is, what is expected of the planner, I guess, to make the process more smooth? From your guys' perspectives, what's expected?
That we work together, right? It's a common goal, and we both want events to come back. So it's really collaboration and thoroughness, but to also make it easier for everyone so they enjoy themselves and it's not so forced.
I think that's a great answer. And I think in addition to that, the communication is, we would hope, and we provide materials to them, that they would communicate with the attendees to make sure that all the attendees understand. We'll do things like that in terms of the room reservations, and we'll provide all of that detail, but just to ensure that they understand coming in what they're going to be faced with as an attendee and what the guidelines are. And we found that just constant communication and collaboration with a meeting planner is key, which is kind of normal for us, right? That's the industry we're in. So in that respect, this is not too hard to navigate.
Thank you.
Can I add something to that? I think when we're having meetings right now, especially with overnight guest room stays, that we really need to think of all of our guests and make sure we're communicating with our other guests staying in our hotels what is going on, because those questions do happen. And one of the questions that came up for us is, how are we handling the elevators during a group? Because the leisure customer that's on the elevator certainly do not want to be with 50 other attendees, and you have the signage, but are they, paying attention to that? So that's something else to think about.
That's a great point. And I do know there's been questions about elevators, and how are you guys handling elevators?
So we have signage in our elevator. It's 3 people per cab. So that way there's social distancing. One thing I did do when I had my group is I have multiple levels of meeting space. So I would have the attendees go to their guest room from the banquet space. So that way, if there is quite a few of them in a cab, if it stops on the lobby, an individual person wouldn't get on the cab.
Perfect. And I think a lot of hotels are doing that. They're just limiting the number of people. And actually, I think attendees are also opting. When I've been at the hotels, if I'm on one and if an elevator comes up and it has 2 people in it already, I'll just wait for another elevator. And I find a lot of people are doing that. So that's working out well. Well, we're getting ready to wrap up. We do have a couple last questions. And I want to remind you guys to keep your questions coming in there if you do have them, because I'll stay on until they're answered. I'm going to go through, and the team is going to, the panel, they're going to be giving their key kind of resource for you to take away, so you have a tangible to walk away here from this meeting with if you don't have one already. And then I'm going to share some of my resources with you at the very end of the program. So that being said, they're asking about amenities like the pool and fitness centers. Can you guys share what you're doing if there's, if you have restrictions on time or what you're doing with it? I know earlier on in the conversation, Kathleen, Jessica from my team talked about her recent experience at a hotel with how they manage the pool. You may want to reach out to Jessica specifically, or Jessica, you respond to her about that feedback. But are you guys doing anything different than what Jessica brought up already?
Not really.
Okay.
The spa is open, but in regards to amenities, but the steam and sauna and hot tubs within the men's and women's are closed because we can't effectively maintain distancing, but you can come in, check in, and go directly to a treatment room. And then the timing is staggered, so we have adequate time in between treatments, for example, to make sure that that room is completely cleaned before we put another appointment into it.
Perfect. And I was going to say that whole spa experience, because I've been doing spying at properties, and so a lot of them have moved to outdoors. They're doing the person giving you the massage, the masseuse, is wearing not only a mask but a facial cover. And the ones that I've been using, I'm fine wearing a mask, except for when I'm face down. I kind of feel claustrophobic with it on. They have no problem with me removing it when I am face down. They have 2 layers of protection on. If I would have had that on, they would probably only have 1 layer of protection. So you guys just keep in mind, we have been moving into a position where we're able to use these services. It's just different. The arrival's different. The cleaning time between sessions is different. And we just need to be cognizant of that. I know the spas that I've been using that have moved outdoors, you change outdoors. There's not a locker room area. So it's a whole different ball game in that arena. Anybody else doing anything different in terms of your pool or fitness?
We're pretty much doing the same thing. We're staggering times in the spa. We've cut down some of those amenities. So because of that, we've lowered the prices a little bit to reflect that. We have a really nice spa with all the amenities, and folks like to stay down and go to the jacuzzi and the pool and things of that nature. And then in the pool, it's the same thing. It's more of making an appointment and then exercising the distance in the pool area.
Perfect. And I know somebody's on that call that's independent property, and all of you guys are not from independent properties, but I have had people on that have been from independent properties, and I believe, Joe, yours is more of like a small boutique, and Jim, I believe yours is also a small boutique. What they're saying is they feel like their issue is different than yours, in that they're having budget issues, and it's really not different. Right?
I wouldn't say it's different. No.
What's that?
It's the same. It's the same. Yeah, we have 5 hotels in this Colonial Williamsburg area, and one of them is a Marriott and is a franchise. So, we still have all the expenses to go with that. So, we closed down one of the 5, and yeah, we're living through it just as well, and going with limited staff and things of that nature.
Yeah, we have 3 properties here in Park City, all right here on Deer Valley, and we wanted to reopen. It's one of those things where we had to do things completely different. As a 5-star resort, you have a bunch of services you normally provide, and we simply can't. So that relates to the regulations that are in place, and then some of it is economically driven too. So basically, we've gone back to what I call a zero-based budget, meaning if you have a guest in the hotel, you have 1 guest room in on a particular day, what does it take? What does it really take for you to be able to take care of that guest? And then we go from there, and we add it back in based on occupancy. So we have to be very careful, which kind of comes into the collaboration between meeting guests and what we're talking about here is, we want to be very flexible in terms of attritions and cancellations and things, but we need your help to help us manage so that we can continue on in this business, especially in the short term. I mean, I think everybody on this panel will all be here for the long term, but in this period of time, we have to be careful. We have to manage, we have to work together to make sure that we're maximizing the opportunities for both of us, for our attendees and for the hotel.
Yeah, and I do think it's different now than later. Go ahead, Joe.
I'm sorry. For the independent property, another thing that we've done, as Jim stated, one of our hotels is a 5-star hotel, the Williamsburg Inn, and we've only opened that Thursday through Sunday. So it's open, 3 nights a week, and that allows us to provide the level of service we need, because most of our demand at this point in that hotel is leisure on the weekend. So that's something that some of these independent hotels can think about, is open up on a limited basis.
Perfect. Okay, you guys, we're going to get ready to wrap up, and I really appreciate you guys being on and taking time for this to listen to the panelists today. We have one last question for the panelists. If you can leave the participants with one lasting resource and/or best practice, what would it be? And Lynn, I'm going to start with you.
My suggestion is to stay really in tune with your local community and your state on your guidelines. I pay attention now daily to Cal OSHA, and then also I pay attention to my state and city DMOs. My DMOs have really been my best friend during this, because they also take the leisure perspective and the group perspective, and it's helped. Best practice is really for my banquet servers. Originally, we had just the masks for them, and then we ended up adding the shield and the eye covering for them so they could feel safer, and also has a better look to it when they're actually providing the service.
Joe, I'm going to go to you and ask you the same question for best practice or one lasting resource.
Well, I'll give you a plug here. I think a great resource would be Meeting Sites Pro. You've done a great job of putting these panel discussions together for a long time. We appreciate what you're doing for the industry and stepping in and taking a leadership role. So, I would encourage people to reach out to folks like yourself with all the work that you put in for resources. For us, we're using the same resources in terms of the CDC and our local government, Marriott's a big help to us because the lodge is a Marriott autograph collection, so we reach out to them as well. Best practices is really, in general terms, is communication and collaboration. We all know what the guidelines are, and they change so quickly. You know, as I mentioned, we went from phase 3 in Virginia to just a few counties back to phase 2, and you just have to be quick and nimble and communicate constantly to make sure that we're all adhering to the guidelines and we're setting ourselves up for success.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joe. Okay, Cornelia.
I say forget competition. Talk to all your neighboring hotels, meeting planners, whoever used to be your competition, collaborate with them. And collaborate so far as to even sharing what did not work, so everybody can learn. Because, you know, I'm sick of people saying we're in this together, but guess what? We're in this together, and we need to make this work, and we need people to feel safe to travel again and to stay at our properties and to have meetings. And the only way we can do this if we work together and tell each other what worked and what didn't work, so we all can get better and smoother in our execution.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Cornelia. And that's the whole concept of this. And we've had some third parties on. Those of you that are on the call, if you're having meetings and you have resources, you're interested in joining the call, please contact myself or somebody on my team. We'd love to have you on. It's a really important process that we go through here on sharing these updates and really helping everybody get on board and get comfortable with the fact that we can have meetings safely. So thanks, Cornelia. Jim, last but not least, your best practice or resource that you want to share with everybody.
Well, kind of to piggyback on a little bit on what Cornelia said, we've put an extra emphasis. And one thing we've always done, felt like we've always done very well, is post-con reports. But it is a mandatory thing now where we have our vice president of operations calls every meeting planner after their event, and he just spends some time on the phone with them talking about it. He puts out a summary after it's done. Then that started since we reopened July 1. Every group we've had, he's done that, and then we take that information and we push it down appropriately. You know, in within the meeting realm specifically, or in the event specifically, we also have now a COVID section in the captain's report, so that we're getting it on a granular level every day after every event. What's happened, what worked, what didn't work, here was an issue, here's what went well, and then just sharing that up, and then making sure we all have that information to share to meeting planners as they're coming in, you know, for the next meeting. And then for just a industry, the Events Industry Council, if you're familiar with that, just put out a section under Apex under that tab. So if you go to their website, there's a whole new COVID piece there that has some kind of worldly broad reaching information that I think is helpful there. So if you ever need that, and this is for both sides of the table, as planners and hoteliers. So that's a good resource that I found.
That is, and that'll be on the resources that we send out to them, as well as the CDC recently updated their guidelines on gathering. So, and they also have a new tool that they put out on risk assessment. So if you guys aren't familiar with that, you should check that out, and that'll be in the resources that we're going to get ready to give you. So thank you guys for your collaboration and for your partnership on these live meetings. And today was excellent. I just really appreciate it. So thank you guys for being on. I hope to see you at a future one. And we'll ask you guys to go off camera now, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so we're going to go through real quick some of my resources, and one of the things I'm kicking off with is the new COVID-19 legislation, which I'm really happy to hear. We've talked about the assumption of risk doctrine before with regards to waivers and in like some type of protection where if you willingly go to something and you realize it's a risk, you're likely not going to get any damages as a result of a lawsuit. But now there's some official legislation that's happening right now. North Carolina, Oklahoma, Utah, Wyoming, and Iowa have passed bills to provide protection to businesses for COVID-19 lawsuits if proper safety procedures are being followed. And that's a fantastic law. A lot of these even have meeting planning by title listed in there. So you guys should look at that. There's also discussion on a federal level of the, to protect businesses from lawsuits. Again, it's only in the instance if proper safety and procedures are followed. If you are negligent at all, this will not help. But this is for those of us that are trying to do this stuff right, putting best practice is in place, and we want to avoid potential frivolous lawsuits. So keep an eye out on that. There's also this drive-through events option. I really found this to be just so innovative. We've had so much innovation that's happened these last 4 months. I'm so excited about that, what's come of that. Just people taking the tragedy of this all and really making it something that's positive and seeing the optimism in it. So this is a great idea. There are some product launches that are looking at going forward like this. There's also concerts, and there's some corporate meetings that are looking at doing this as an option. So you should check this out if you have a chance. It definitely inspired me. I also want to introduce you to Mask Keeper. This is a great way of holding your mask. I know when I take it off, I often have it hanging off my ear. So you could use this. It costs about $2 to $3 per Mask Keeper. So it's depending on the quantity that you order, but it's a really great resource for holding those masks. So I want to share that with you. Also, some PPE resources that came up while we were on the call. There's resources for plexiglass. You can both buy and rent. Meeting Shields only has them for sale. They were on last week's call. They did a really great job. They also have masks, or the shield masks that you can buy from them. Accent on Arrangements, who's been a partner with us for years, sells all sorts of PPE. They also rent the PPE, so I'm really excited to be having them as a partner now in doing PPE. They do signs, they do plexiglass, they do facial, they do hand sanitizer, they do it all. So just contact those companies if you have any questions on PPE. If they can't do it, they'll direct you to where they can be done. You also have hand washing stations, which are great. They have hand sensors and foot operated sensors on there that you can rent or you can buy. Temperature scanners, which Cornelia brought up on the call. You can take your temperature, and you can rent these. Now, thank God, before they were only option to buy them, but now you can rent them, and they can get up to 16 people through at a time, which is really a fantastic resource. I do know they're working on being able to do them for more, but right now they can get 16 people at a time. So those are those resources. Those are my resources from me to you. I mentioned early on that we have these meetings with the purpose of informing, inspiring, elevating, and sharing and spreading hope, all while we get back to business with safety top of mind. Our hope today is that you gained at least one new resource during our presentation that will help you move forward. This is really important for our industry, and I really just want to thank all of you for your time, for joining us today, for your messages. We appreciate all the feedback and support. And remember, we are all in this together, and we will rise together. I'm going to keep this screen up for a little bit so you have our LinkedIn profiles. You can go and look us up and link in with us there. We also are going to keep the chat open for a little bit just so you can go in there and make sure you're getting the resources you need that my team has dropped in there. And thank you guys again for spending your morning with me. I really do appreciate it. And cheers, be healthy, be safe, and I'll see you next week. Thank you.